Howdy, y'all. If ever there was a bus company that showed the good things and all the bad things about deregulation in one hit, that company would be Boro'line. It started off as a typical municipal fleet, but then morphed into something completely different, and it grew very quickly to quite a large fleet. At face value, it seemed it would be a total success running tendered services for London buses in London. But then, overnight, Boro'line disappeared. So what happened to them and where did they go? Well, watch this video and I will try and shed a little bit of light on it for you. And yes, I know that Maidstone Borough isn't the only company that followed this trajectory. But hailing from Kent myself and owning several vehicles that have operated in Kent, I find this particular story quite interesting. And I hope you'll allow me to indulge myself while I tell the story of Boro'line to you. Boro'line started way back in 1904 as Maidstone Corporation Transport. In those early days though, it was only running trams. However, they started to run buses in 1924. And between 1928 and 1930, the trams were replaced mostly by trolley buses. And I'm just going to pause for a moment because what has happened with the world? You go back 50, 60 years ago, we had electric trams, electric trolley buses. Even 30, 40 years ago, we had electric milk floats delivering glass bottles of milk, which could easily be washed up, returned, recycled and reused. We had all this wonderful infrastructure and it was thrown away. But now we've got to go electric and now we've got to go carbon neutral. Anyway, back to the buses. The livery of Maidstone Corporation had always been some shade of brown, or golden ochre I believe it's called, with a white or a cream relief. However, by the mid-1960s, the trolley bus had fallen out of favour. Here we go again. And the last trolley buses ran in 1967. Now, like a lot of municipal companies that had trolley buses, Maidstone Corporation found it was easier to replace the trolley buses with buses like the Leyland Atlantean. You see, even by the standards of the time, the Leyland Atlantean was quite a simple bus to drive. It had an easy to use, although easy to abuse, semi-automatic gearbox, as opposed to a manual crash gearbox, which a lot of buses that were in service at this time were actually fitted with. Now, trolley buses don't have gears at all. In a similar style to modern buses, the trolley bus driver just puts his foot down slowly and the bus pulls away and builds up speed itself. Now, I know that's a very basic layman's description there, and if you love trolley buses and you preserve trolley buses and you're into trolley buses, I apologise for making it sound very, very simple and very basic. And if you'd like me to do a video on trolley buses, please comment down below because they're actually really interesting vehicles. And as I said before, I think in this day and age, it's something that I think we could all look back on and learn from. It was felt that complicated crash gearbox and even synchromesh gearbox might be a little bit too much for trolley bus drivers to transfer over onto. So the Atlanteans with their semi-automatic gearbox was deemed an easier option. And so the Maidstone Corporation trolley buses were replaced by a sizable fleet of massy-bodied Leyland Atlanteans. Later, more Atlanteans would turn up with Northern Counties bodywork, Northern Counties having taken over the business of Massey. In 1974, the government, in its infinite wisdom, had a reorganisation of all the local boundaries. Now again, this wasn't just in Maidstone, this was all over the country. And Maidstone Corporation became Maidstone Borough Council as it gained control of a lot of the rural district councils to the south and the east of the town. And so on the 1st of April, April Fool's Day, 1974, a very traditional municipal fleet passed into the ownership of the new Maidstone Borough Council. Now the fleet wasn't all rear-engined Leyland Atlanteans, they still had 18 Leyland Titans with massy bodywork. And these were all of the PD2 variety, the oldest being a PD2/30 from 1957. With the exception of 2 bus routes, the majority of the corporation routes always terminated within the boundary of the town, with the more rural district routes of Maidstone and the surrounding areas being operated by Maidstone and District. In 1974, the company tried 2 single-deck Ford demonstrators. However, instead of going for Fords, the company went for Bedfords. And in January 1975, 4 Bedford YRQs with Willowbrook 45-seat bodywork arrived, and this was to be a taste of things to come. In a complete change of policy, Maidstone Corporation would withdraw all of its double-deckers over the next few years and replace them with high-capacity single-decker Bedford models. Now, at this point, it's fair to say that Maidstone was quite financially savvy, because as these new buses were delivered, the older ones were freed up and were not always withdrawn from service. Hiring them out to other operators would give the company some revenue. In 1974, 3 Leyland Titans went on hire to Alder Valley at Reading, and between 1975 and 1977, both Leyland Titan PD2s and Leyland Atlanteans were hired to London Country during their rather extreme vehicle shortage. Now, I did do a video about this previously, and I will try and remember to put a little link in the top right hand corner by my channel icon, so once you finish watching this video you can backtrack and watch that one. Now, just to confuse things with this complete reversal from double deck operation to single deck operation, in 1976 Maidstone Borough Council tried out a Volvo Ailsa with Van Hall McArdle bodywork, which was destined for South Yorkshire PTE. This was registered LWB 405P. So it's quite interesting that despite this policy for single deckers, they were still in a position where they would consider going back to double deckers. Now, of course, all these high capacity single decker buses were one man operated, as indeed had been the Leyland Atlanteans before them. But to aid this one-man operation and to see the last of the double-deckers off, 14 duple-bodied Leyland Leopards arrived in 1976, and these had previously been used on an experimental park and ride in Nottingham. They were in a lilac and maroon livery and became known as the Lilac Leopards. Over the next few years, there were other notable vehicles that entered the fleet. There were some second-hand Leyland Leopards bodied by Seddon Pennine that came from Lancaster in 1975, and in the early 1980s Maidstone Corporation became the proud, if that's the right word, owner of the only 4 Bedford JJL midi buses. Now again, I've done a video on the JJL, and I will try and put this link to this video up in the top right hand corner. That is quite an interesting little story. Now, interestingly, in September 1982, the company trialled a Leyland DAB articulated bus, and this was FHE 291V, which had been used up in Sheffield. Although looking like a Leyland National, it was nothing like a Leyland National underneath that skin. It was an underfloor chassis, and it seated 55 but had a standing capacity of 65. Now, Maidstone Borough Council had always been quite heavily involved in coaching and had a fair-sized coach fleet at one point. And from the 26th of May, they started a joint service with Burnley and Pendle and Leicester under the City Flyer name. The service running from Dover to Blackpool. One of the vehicles that operated it was this 1984 Bedford YNT with rare right contour bodywork. It was delivered as A201 OKN, but a preserved trolley bus soon surrendered its registration and it became HKR 11. And aside to the private hires and of course the City Flyer service, the Boro'line coaches could be found operating National Express services and continental trips. In the run-up to deregulation, Maidstone Borough Council were keen to try and distance themselves from their bus operations, and so the bus operations were to become an arm's length company. Now, I worked for a county council bus company many years ago, and it was still very much like that then. On the one hand, they wanted to be seen as providing transport for the people of the area, but on the other hand, it seemed slightly corrupt for a council-owned company to be bidding on council-run tenders. So just paint the vehicles in different colours and put an eye-catching name on there and you get away with it. The result of this was Boro'line Maidstone. The bus fleet, which had started out in the blue and cream livery and had gone back to the brown and cream livery, was now painted in a rather bright yellow, blue and grey livery. Although, so it seemed just to confuse the locals, a lot of the buses had the cream areas overpainted with the bright yellow, so they were actually brown, yellow and grey buses. Obviously at that point they had to save up for the blue paint. A new route network in Maidstone was introduced, and this new route network required both double-deckers and midi buses. However, while the company was awaiting delivery of its new vehicles, it hired in buses to run these new routes. Vehicles such as these special low-height Bristol LHSs from East Kent, and they'd been ordered by East Kent to run a route that passed under a low railway bridge in Ashford. Boro'line would eventually go on to buy the vehicles outright instead of continually hiring them. The two double-decker buses, when they turned up, were these rather impressive Scania K92s with East Lancs bodywork. They seated 37 downstairs and 55 upstairs, and at the time of their delivery in 1987 they were the largest buses in the UK. This would see the regular return of double-deck operation, with the hire of 4 Leyland Atlanteans from Eastbourne buses to complement the 2 Scania double-deckers. 1988 would see the first of the London contracts awarded to Boro'line, and the company had ordered 14 Optare-bodied Leyland Olympians for these routes. However, when the delivery of these Olympians was delayed, Boro'line was forced to hire Leyland Atlanteans from Kingston upon Hull City Transport. 12 of these buses, of various vintage, would run the London contracts in South East London. These routes being the 233 from Eltham to Swanley and the 132 Eltham to Bexley Heath. They also won 2 circular routes, which was the 228 and the 328. The company opened an operating base in Crayford for the London vehicles. The Optare Leyland Olympians finally turned up, although the last 3 were so late that Boro'line cancelled the order, and these were replaced by 2 Scanias and a Volvo. Back in Maidstone, more buses were being hired from other operators to help maintain the services there, and these would include such strange things as 4 Seddon Pennines from Clydeside Scottish and 4 long wheelbase Northern Counties bodied Bristol VRs from Reading, as well as 4 MCW Metro riders from Northumbria. Another London contract won was the 188, which was started on the 19th of November 1988 and finally took Boro'line vehicles into central London. This running between Euston and Greenwich. Well, it would have taken Boro'line vehicles into central London if the new ones had turned up. Again, they were delivered late, and in the interim period, hired buses had to be used to operate the service. And these took the form of Ipswich Leyland Atlanteans and Nottingham Daimler Fleet Lines. In the meantime, there were also problems with the London buses' Bexley Heath operations. This resulted in the company taking on a further 2 routes in the Bexley Heath area, which again they didn't have any vehicles for. So 10 Leyland Nationals were hired from London Country North East, although these were later replaced by former London Transport vehicles that had been purchased. These 2 routes were the 422 and the 492. Now, if you're thinking that's an awful lot of outlay being paid out on hired vehicles, stay with it. The 14 Volvo city buses for the 188 route turned up in March and April 1989, which allowed some of the hired vehicles from Nottingham and Ipswich to return to their original owners. However, it wasn't all second-hand and hired vehicles. In addition to the Leyland Olympians and the Volvo city buses previously mentioned, the company took delivery of brand new Metro riders, Leyland Lynxes, and a mixture of DAF buses and coaches. With Boro'line distracted by its London operations, Maidstone and District decided to launch an assault on the Maidstone operations of the company. They launched a network of local services across the town in direct competition with Boro'line. And to combat this, from the 15th of December 1991, Boro'line introduced 2 routes in the Medway Towns area, in direct competition with Maidstone and District. However, this would see Boro'line vehicles banned from the Pentagon bus station, and they had to pick up in nearby Military Road. In addition to Maidstone and District, there was also competition in Maidstone from bygone buses. In 1990, to help bolster the allocation in Maidstone and also for the services in Medway, 4 Leyland Atlanteans arrived from Nottingham and were quickly painted into fleet livery. 2 more of these Nottingham Atlanteans would turn up just over a year later, and these would remain in the Nottingham City Transport livery. And this, in all fairness, was something that happened a lot in the Boro'line fleet. Vehicles would be bought in second hand and they would remain in the previous owner's colours. Or they would be ex-demonstrators painted white and they would be left in the white with just Boro'line stickers put on the side of them. It made the fleet look rather down at heel, didn't it, and rather amateurish. In March 1992, things were going rather wrong for Boro'line, with their Leyland Lynxes being repossessed. And this was sadly followed in May 1992 by their DAF buses being repossessed too. Now, if you've been watching this video all the way through, it will come as no surprise to you that the bus operations had been losing money since 1989, which is probably around the time they started hiring in all these buses from other operators. Maidstone Boro'line were looking for a buyer for the whole business, and in February 1992 they managed to sell the London operations to Kentish Bus, and this included 57 vehicles. This left the Maidstone operations with 61 vehicles, and this was at the same time placed into receivership. To their credit, despite some of the vehicles being repossessed, services continued to be run, with the last of them being run on the 29th of May 1992. The Maidstone fleet was eventually sold to Maidstone and District, who took over the 43 vehicles and the offices and depot in Armstrong Road in Maidstone. All bar 2 of the vehicles, which were coaches and were transferred into Maidstone and District's new enterprise subsidiary, were sold on to a local dealer, Wealdon PSV at 5 Oak Green, where they had their fleet names removed and were put up for sale. Well, when I say their fleet names removed, most of their fleet names removed. There's a memorable picture I've seen, and one of the buses in Wealdon's yard that's up for sale has had certain specific letters of its fleet name removed, so it just read Oral Me. Stay classy, Maidstone. Ironically, some of the former Boro'line vehicles that had been repossessed ended up passing into the ownership of Kentish Bus. Also, a former London Transport Leyland National that had been operated by Boro'line found itself in the fleet of local operator New Venture of Aylesford, where it operated services in the town. Both Maidstone Borough Council in its latter years and Boro'line were a little bit quirky in the way they operated, and in all fairness that probably added to some of their charm. All sorts of vehicles were operated in all sorts of weird and wonderful liveries, but it would be the constant hiring of vehicles and the fact they spread their resources too thinly with the London routes that was the final nail in the coffin. It might come to surprise you that most bus routes are worked out at 10% profit, so imagine all that hiring of vehicles eating into that 10% profit. It would soon go, wouldn't it? So would Boro'line have survived if they'd have just focused on their Maidstone operations? Possibly. However, Maidstone and District, a bit like a drunk coming out of a kebab shop on a Friday night, wanted to take on the world. And I think this would have resulted in the end of Boro'line anyway. However, it probably wouldn't have dragged on for quite as long as it did. I do hope you enjoy this rather sad story of the demise of an operator from Kent. As always, I love reading your comments when you share your memories and thoughts on these videos. So what are your memories and thoughts on Boro'line? Did you used to travel on Boro'line? Did you used to travel on the Boro'line London operations at all? Or did you used to travel on it when it was Maidstone Borough Council? And do you remember Maidstone Corporation? Comment down below. If you did enjoy it, please like and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss my other videos in this and my other series here on YouTube. All money raised goes to the upkeep of buses in the Southern Counties Omnibus Collection, which makes you awesome for watching this video and helping the buses in preservation. Thank you once again for watching. Bye for now.